because you're building out this creative startup in the content and creative space, but also because you've been such an accomplished person in the arts in space. So I'd love to hear your story. So Saran, could you just introduce yourself to everybody?
Hey, hi everybody, Sern here. So I've been a filmmaker for the past more than 10 years, and 2 years ago I decided to take the plunge and go into entrepreneurship. So I first started with joining Entrepreneur First, but I did not form a startup when I was there. So a couple months later, my friend and ex-colleague decided to leave his company, so we decided to start a company together. Yeah, the first company because it was about employer branding. And then COVID hit, so no one was hiring. So we had to pivot at the time. And so in April last year, we decided to work on Sendjoy, which is what our current startup is. It's a marketplace where consumers can book content creators to make video greetings for their loved ones. Yeah, that's where I am now.
Amazing. And Saran, I think you've also done quite a lot more than that as well, right? You have been a BAFTA award-winning
Mm,
Singaporean producer who has
yeah.
published and made lots and lots of live action and animated short
Mm,
films as well, and won so
mm,
many awards.
yeah.
So I got to ask, how did you first get started, and how did this film thing first bite you?
Okay. So it was actually when I was a child. There were things that happened around me, and then I was just like thinking, oh, if I can close my eyes and remember that moment forever, that would be great. So later on, when I grew up, because I was like 5 years old at the time, so when I grew up, I realized that hey, that thing is called a camera. So I asked my dad whether I can get a camera. So that's when I started like just filming random moments around me of my friends, of my family. And it was always at the back of my mind that I want to go into filmmaking, but the climate back then was not perfect for filmmakers. Like there were very few filmmakers in Singapore, and like parents are of course like very worried. Like what is the future of filmmaking? Like who knows like whether we can survive or make money from it? Yeah, so I did not dare to have the idea that okay, I want to go into filmmaking because I come from a quite a humble family. Yeah, so it was only when I realized that hey, NTU, like Nanyang Technological University, they offer a course in filmmaking. So that's when I was like, okay, if I go to NTU and I graduate, I still have an NTU degree, right? I can be a teacher or something. So at least that's something I can teach to my dad about. so so that's when I decided to take the degree at NTU. My filmmaking like career started.
Yeah, and obviously, I'm kind of eyeballing your profile here as well. What's interesting is that you started out with that obviously eye for film initially, but you chose to deepen your craft and keep going at it. So, what explains the difference between people who want to explore the creative industry versus you actually choosing to make it actually something that you want to deepen your craft and master it?
Yeah, I think actually the landscape has changed quite a bit since then. Because back then it was not possible to shoot something with the iPhone, or like not everyone has a camera that is good enough in order to like go into like get a screening at the cinema or what. But nowadays we hear things like, oh, people shot a movie on the iPhone. Yeah, so like these tools have become accessible. Back when I first joined filmmaking, we were even using tapes. Yeah, so it was not digital at all. That's why my course is actually called digital filmmaking, because we were trying to learn the new ways of filmmaking. Yeah, so back then you really have to like be in it. Like you have to learn all the traditional tools in cinematography, directing, and all of that in order to produce a film. But right now, it's like the tools have been democratized and a lot of people have access to it. And actually, to me, that is really exciting. Yeah.
And when you were taking those initial courses in digital filmmaking, and that's interesting, you notice, which is these tools that become easier and easier over time. How have you seen the industry shift actually? Because you've been part of that shift as well, right? I mean, you're part of that new wave of filmmakers who have been taking on these new tools and catalyzing them as well. So talk us through how have you seen the industry shift?
Yeah, so back then, when I was in school, like all my friends, like or even me, like we aspire to be Wong Kar-wai or Quentin Tarantino, or like Tsai Ming Liang. But I recently heard from my ex-lecturer that the students who come into the filmmaking course, some of them YouTubers and TikTokers. So like we have quite different like pathways now, because I think they see how the YouTubers or TikTokers of the day, they have been generating a lot of income, like they are the new stars of today. That's why like the mindset of the idea of filmmaking has shifted a little bit. Yeah. As like still a big group of people in the traditional craft of filmmaking, they put in the hours and years of craft to get something beautiful to go on to the cinema. Yeah, I think to me that's like it has become like a different genre of its own now.
Interesting. So you wouldn't look at it as a conflict between creators versus filmmakers, but you actually look at creators as a genre of film.
Yeah. I really believe that with the tools that we have nowadays, that's why like it gave birth to a big group of different people who have access to filmmaking, like to be able to create different types of content. Yeah.
Interesting. And there you are. And what's interesting, of course, is that you just now you mentioned the role models, right? Wong Kar-wai and Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
And so there's this also interesting dynamic of East versus West, right? Which is, I think, quite interesting microcosm for Southeast Asia, right? Like that for the different cultures. So how do you see that blend or conflict between East versus West? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a interesting question, because actually I was educated in film in Singapore. Then I went to the UK where I did my master's, where I received the education from the West as well. So I think throughout my career, I've always been thinking like, how do we blend the East and the West and create a product that people today can understand? Because like young people like us in Singapore, we're actually very westernized. Like we actually absorb more Western content than Eastern content. Yeah, so we're thinking like, okay, what is the voice for us, for our generation? So like we've always been searching, like, because the thing is, right, we don't really speak Chinese to our friends anymore. Yeah, but the movies that we see coming out of this region, they are all very Mandarin based. They are like, at one point there was even a conversation like, oh, okay, if you see Singaporean faces speaking English, like that film is not accurate. Like it feels weird. But actually, interestingly, Crazy Rich Asians, they found a voice for the Asian faces to be able to speak English. Of course, it's a very is a very like niche area. Like it's a very niche aspect of our culture. Like not everyone is as rich as them and all that. But I found that at least there's now an access to the West. Like there is actually one film that both East and West can relate to. I think that is a great start. Yeah, and that gives birth to a lot more filmmakers and people like us to be able to have a representation on screen.
Yeah. And when you think about that representation, obviously, East versus West, creators versus film, what was that like, obviously winning, BAFTA, right? Representing Singapore. How did that feel for you as part of the experience?
Yeah, it was actually quite unbelievable night, because I got to meet a lot of the big stars. Like I saw Jennifer Lawrence and Daniel Craig about 50 meters away from me. I did not get to shake their hands or what, but it was quite a magical evening. In fact, one of the best moments of the night was when I was on the winner stage, so everybody have to like queue up to shake Prince William's hand and like take a photo together. After the photo taking session, there was this lady. She's black woman. Like she came up to me and she said to me, "Hey, I'm really glad that you're here with me tonight. There are so few of us." So I look around me, and in fact, we were the only two non-white and non-male people there on the stage. Yeah, so I was glad that we could share that moment together. Yeah, I wouldn't have noticed that if she didn't tell me about it. Yeah.
No, that's a really interesting observation, actually. Um, what was that like? I mean, for you to realize that, that you were one of the few, non-white, non-male folks on stage, or in part of the winners, part of the representation there.
Yeah, so actually, I think it was an interesting journey for me because in Singapore we are like the Chinese is the majority population. So I never really felt like okay, I was underrepresented or I'm at the lower end of the stick. So when I moved to the UK, I never felt like my classmates that my skin color is different. I didn't notice that. It took me around 6 months to 9 months before I really felt that hey, like I'm different from the rest of them. It was when people were is so good even if you're not a white person, or like sometimes people would like when I was walking on the streets, like people would storm in front of me and try to scare me, like and try to say like oh konnichiwa like really loudly. It's like they would deliberately try to like scare me. That's when I realized okay, I'm actually different. I need to be careful in this place. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I think I've done, on a similar note, I think I've done quite a bit of improv. So similar to you in your journey, I got to learn improv because I was in the States. So it's very Western art form in that sense, a comedy. And I always remember that it took me a while, but I realized that I was often the only Asian person in all the classes. So you'd be like consistently in all my courses, it was like, like there'd be about 10 to 15 to 20 people. I'll be like the one Asian person in all the classes. Or maybe it'll be two sometimes. And I think that's one time that was quite interesting was there's a scene, and basically I was doing an archetype of like, a Gandalf reference. And then halfway through the scene, I realized that everybody around me thought I was Confucius. And I never felt so, so much dissonance all of a sudden, because I was like, well, there's that, the typing, right? Anyway. So, I mean, obviously I had to learn that. I had to like, use more Gandalf quotes as well. But it was interesting to see that, typing as me as Confucius as well. But also they also didn't know how to handle it as well, because they also didn't want to like, interact with me as Confucius as well. So anyway, so we had an interesting dynamic for that scene. So a lot of people running around in that scene. So there you are, obviously, kind of like you have this voice dynamic, right? Which is like East versus West. There's a film dynamic. You're representing it at, BAFTA, and you think, how do you choose to represent that voice from your perspective now? Because, obviously at the start, you are feeling, the insider versus the outsider, right? So in Singapore, you are the insider, right? In many ways. But in the West, on the stage of the BAFTA, you're the outsider, right? And now, obviously we're both more mature, more professionals now. So how have you matured in terms of representing that, or matured in terms of integrating both of that, the insider voice and the outsider voice in your art, or in terms of how you think about the art form?
That's interesting. In fact, when I came back from the UK, I had like a reverse culture shock again. Because actually throughout my teenage years, I'm very Chinese. Like I speak Mandarin to all my friends. In fact, my mom said, "Oh, you have to learn English, so you have to go to an English JC." So I went to Victoria JC. So actually, the first week of my class, like it was the first time that I spent one whole week speaking in English. and I had Indian friends and Malay friends for the first time in my life. So, um, but I think after I went to the UK and I came back to Singapore, people suddenly thought that I'm very like Ang Mo Pai. I'm very English educated. So I work at this office that is very Chinese based. So like my boss thought like, oh, I'm very English educated. So everybody spoke to me in English. Then suddenly one day they realized that, oh, I can speak Chinese. So there was a bit of like a reverse culture shock for me. Then I realized, okay, I have to readapt back to Singapore. Yeah. And I think like these I try to like take these experiences that I have. And in fact, I don't think I have found that voice yet. I'm still searching. Yeah, even in my works, like I think, okay, should I make a film in Mandarin or English? Like what is more real to the people here? And I sometimes I receive scripts from directors, and they ask me, okay, like, is this film suitable for like the American market or the Singapore market? So I read it like the way it's being written is very Americanized because the director has spent time in the US, but the whole film is set in Singapore. So we are thinking like, okay, how do we integrate this? If we make something that is too Singaporean, like we have Singlish involved, then it's only suitable for the Singaporean market. Like the film will never travel outside of Singapore. But if we Americanized it, will people think like, oh, it's another Crazy Rich Asian, it's not relatable. So I think we are still searching for the voice that really represents us and other people in the world would be interested in.
And that's actually an interesting dynamic, right? Because, we talked a little bit about, like East versus West in that sense, or Singapore and, America, because there's so much center of gravity really honestly around Hollywood, right? I mean, that's the indisputably like, one, giant, mass, and capital, right? Of the talent that's there, one pole of the world. And then I think there's a question of also like what's the Southeast Asia voice
Yeah.
fragmented in terms of like different geographies, different languages, different audiences in terms of their, you know, preferences for content, but also, in terms of their, understanding of what, like exact movie, language, right? And styles are, right? So how do you think about that? Do you feel like there's an ASEAN art form out there, or there's a Southeast Asia voice for, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand,
Yeah,
Singapore,
yeah.
Malaysia,
Yeah, for sure.
Philippines? Yeah.
I think I think to really find that voice, we first have to appreciate what we have in Singapore that is truly unique to us. Because a lot of times, like we are like, okay, we don't want to speak Singlish because we think it's like low class or something. But in fact, to Westerners, that is very interesting. Yeah, the way we speak and how we like reduce like the sentences so that we speak in very precise words. I think that is interesting. I think we have to first like observe around us and find things that is actually very Singaporean. Like for example, outside of Singapore, you don't see it anywhere else. Sometimes because we are right inside the culture, we are very embedded in it, so we don't really appreciate it so much. In fact, we kind of look down on it, and it takes like a third person from elsewhere, like a foreigner, to tell us that, hey, this is interesting. Like I was thinking about Anthony Chen's film Ilo Ilo, like one about the little boy and the maid. So I was speaking to my Western friends about it. Like all of them say that, hey, this is really really interesting to them because in the West, if you are in a family like this, lower like middle class family, you would never have a maid. Yeah. So but in Singapore, like a lot of people in that family have maids. So I never thought that this would be interesting to Westerners. Yeah. So I think we have to first look around us and start appreciating and be positive about our environment. Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Which is like instead of looking at it as a lack of something, like being appreciative of what we actually already have, and saying that there's actually value in that,
Yes.
fundamental, right? And so one interesting aspect about that, of course, is that, we also chose to really, choose to kind of act as a, producer, right? In terms of, and I think a lot of people are confused about what a producer does.
Oh,
I feel like that's something a lot of people are going to ask. I think for me, I think my first introduction to producer would be, Conan O'Brien. I think there's a famous producer called Jordan Schlansky, and then Conan O'Brien always like to ask his producer, say, "What do you do?" Right, and Jordan says that he performs various duties, and that's undefined, right? So
yes.
and that's a kind of now a recurring gag. Could you share a little bit more about, for those who don't know yet? I mean, over so many years, right? Over like 10 years of, winning awards and mastering the craft of being a producer. What exactly have you mastered in the subset of being a producer actually means? Yeah.
Yeah, so we always call it like the bao ka liao duty. So we do everything. Like we start from like looking for funding, like managing the project, looking for crew or like people to work together, like all the way to marketing and distribution. So in fact, when I remember when I was at the master's course in the UK, the teacher told us, okay, can you write on the board what a producer does? So all my classmates, we wrote on the board and we ended up with like 50 over duties. so, so he said, okay, but there's only one thing that a producer really has to do. So he made us like think of all like so the 50 things on the board. He said, okay, which ones can you outsource to other people? Okay, so for example, looking for location, you can hire someone. If you don't know how to find funding, you engage someone as an executive producer, pay them a fee. If you don't know how to do distribution, you hire a marketing expert or like a distribution expert. So we streamlined, and then we realized, okay, there's really one thing that only you have to do as a producer, which is to look for the project. Yeah. So no one else can do that for you. You are the only one who can decide whether you are going to take up this project. And then like it struck something in me. Then I realized that, oh yeah, that's true. Okay, so then make it really a mission to source for projects, find something that I can really connect to, and then I form a team around it. Or sometimes directors or like writers, they pitch stories to me, and I think to myself, okay, is this something that I want to spend the next 3 to 5 years on? Yeah, in fact, I spent 5 years trying to make a short film happen. So the filmmaking is really like a very lengthy journey. So you really do want to pick projects that you can relate to. Yeah.
How do you find that fit, right, between X to Y, right? Is it just like intuition and you just look at the project and just like, this is a fit? Because, that's, I think we'll talk about it later to some extent, but, they call it the founder problem fit, right? Which is like when you're doing a startup, do you resonate with the problem? Do you actually want to spend 7 to 10 years on it? So how does a producer find a script or a concept that resonates with them?
Yeah, I would say it's really not an easy process, and I definitely made mistakes along the way. So, in fact, I was thinking like there are some people that I've let down as well, because sometimes. So my friend told me, right, there are 4 reasons you can take up a project. One is for friendship, one is for money, one is for sex, and one is for can't remember, for glory. Yeah, so there are 4 reasons you can take up a project. So okay, so I've done it for friends. Like some friends say that, oh, I really love this project, so can you help me? And there are some that is, I would say maybe for glory, like the director is someone famous. So I was like, okay, someone that I really want to work with. Yeah, and so these reasons have actually brought me to like unpleasant places, because I felt that I did not really think through very much, and then I spent too long with the director on it. In fact, I felt bad because I wasted both of our time. Like it was only after 2 years then I realized that, okay, maybe this is not the project that I want to carry 5 years of my life on. So I that's why now I'm very cautious about taking up new projects. I don't want to let people down. I really want to be sure that, okay, this is something that I want to do. I want to be with you through this journey.
Interesting. So it's more like what has really changed for you is really like the threshold about which you care about something that's really changed over time. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. And so what's interesting is that, over time, you've had that on and all of this, and you've slowly made a transition towards uh, not just being a producer, but also experimenting more on the technology side, or at least approaching it more from an entrepreneurial side as well. So what was the driver behind that transition to start exploring more of an entrepreneurial path instead of being continuing to be a producer? Which you have already,
Yeah.
won awards for, mastered, and continue to, do well in.
Yeah, interesting. So it was actually inspired by my co-founder. Like he was the trigger. So I remember we were ex-colleagues. So we were sitting in the office pantry one day, and he asked me that question you asked me. What does a producer do? So I told him everything that I said to you just now, and he said, "Oh, so you're an entrepreneur." So I'm like, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur. What is an entrepreneur?" so so he gave me some books to read, like Airbnb, Uber. So I read out all the backgrounds. I was like, interesting, but okay, I'm still going to make films. So I did not jump on the wagon immediately. It took me about 18 months. Like I was observing the things around me. Like I was looking at how like YouTubers are on the rise, and like how people can take a iPhone and start shooting things, and realize that wow, like this craft has been really democratized. Like a lot of people can do it now. It's not a niche group of people who went through 4 years of film school who can make a film. That's when I realized, okay, I need to really look into this. So in fact, I even went to take up like courses to learn to be a YouTuber, just to try and see what the journey is like. I want to feel like I'm in the like the trend, like trying to see what is new coming up. Yeah. And also there were a lot of questions in my mind at the time, like why are people getting paid late? Like in the film industry, sometimes people get paid 6 to 8 months late. And like why are people still bringing pen and paper on set when we can use the computer? Like there are some softwares that we could use, but um, I feel that there are a lot of things that I really want to change. And the only way to do that is to actually start something of my own. Yeah, that's when I decided to take the plunge.
Really interesting. And now that you're like, sometime in, how has that set of learnings changed, right? Because you said that that lens that you said was really the lens from where you were a producer looking at what you would learn, or how you thought becoming a founder, or you would learn from you know trying something new. But now that you're on the founder side of it, looking back, right, and you've gone through two iterations or one giant pivot as well, right, as well. You're out in Korea now, and
Yeah.
doing all kinds of different things as well. How has that set of lessons changed or matured for you from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely less innocent now. Like, yeah, I was telling my co-founder, wow, like we have aged so much these 2 years. But okay, like maybe we can blame COVID. So we were just looking at the pictures from 2 years ago. We're like, okay, like we were a bit hotter back then. Like what happened to us? So I think for sure like we were less idealistic than before. I think we learned a lot of like practical things along the way, like setting up a company, being on our own. Yeah, we will often say like, oh, okay, like back then we were not happy with certain systems, but now we are unhappy with like not having like not having like the certainty. Yeah, so what is pain? The uncertainty. Like we really don't know what's going to happen next month or like in a year. So it's really hard to plan for things. And I would say that part is the most painful in the founder's journey, because when you're an employee, at least you know that okay, no matter how you do, like next month you will get your salary. But now it's very hard to plan. Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting is that, do you feel like the scope of what you shared, right? Like the producer, the 50 things that you had to write down. Do you feel like that was a good encapsulation or good preparation for you to also become a founder?
Yeah, I think for sure there are some skill sets that I think I managed to bring over from producing. I think project management for sure. I think we managed to set up like a good infrastructure to manage our startup. Even though I honestly I did not have business like school training, but I felt that okay, like the things that I'm learning now, I've learned that in producing. Like for example, accounting, financial management, uh, and even fundraising things like how to make the pitch deck, like what might attract people to invest in the startup. I think some of those skill sets are I managed to bring over to entrepreneurship.
When you, I'm sure a lot of people ask you about what's it like to
Yeah.
become a founder now, right? What advice do you give them now? I mean, before they become a founder, any advice you give them?
Um, I think probably the biggest lesson that I learned is that you have to be okay with uncertainty. Like I said just now, that is so far that my biggest pain point as in my personal life. I think they have to be okay with uncertainty and like go with the flow and like just be always be optimistic and hopeful that things will be solved. Because I do feel that I always tell my co-founder like we say that okay if the startup fails is most likely a human reason, like maybe one of us has stopped believing in the idea and one of us decide to give up. It's most likely a human reason rather than other things that happen around you.
Isn't being a producer also have a lot of uncertainty? Like, how's the taste or the flavor of uncertainty different from a producer, where the script or the project could go sideways or nowhere, different from that being a founder from your perspective?
Yeah, really good question. I think as a producer, the uncertainty is really it can be quite painful as well. But I think in the film world, what most people do is they have commercial jobs at the side. So they spend maybe 70% of the time working on commercial projects like adverts, make some money, and they spend 30% of the time doing what they love, like raising funding for the movie. Yeah, but I think in the startup world, I don't think I have the luxury to go and take up like commercial projects because I feel like I have to be 100% in it. Because for a very long time, there were only two of us, me and my co-founder. We didn't have like employees. So we do have to be 100% dedicated to the startup. Yeah. So I think
Ah,
that is the difference. Yeah.
really interesting. Yeah. So that's the interesting. There's a focus dynamic as well, right? That you're kind of implying, which is that as a founder, you have to be 100% focused, versus at least as a producer, to some extent, you can actually diversify your career a little bit to,
Yes, yes.
bridge your lifestyle as well. And one interesting thing that you mentioned as well, was really the aspect about also choosing to build a startup in the creative space, right? Which is good, right? Because now you're building something that you roughly know, but it's also not the same, right? Because it's a different flavor, different approach. How has it changed your view of the industry, right? Because you at the start of it, you mentioned creators are a subset of film, and now I guess you're looking at the creative industry as a subset of technology, or at least a different approach. So how are you thinking about it differently now?
Yeah, I think I have definitely matured a lot of my thought process on how the industry works. I I think for the longest time, right? I actually didn't. I avoided YouTube and like TikTok and all the social media because in my mind I was like, okay, this is not film, so I rejected it and I watched it in a maybe if I do watch it, I would watch some music videos or something like it that's like in a different headspace for me. But I think right now I kind of integrate those together as one big ecosystem. because I think that the YouTubers, like the TikTokers, they are the new content creators of today. Like with this new technology, they manage to generate this type of content, and a lot of young people are actually interested in this kind of content. And I think one part of me that wanted to be a filmmaker was like, I want to make things that influence people. For example, that's why I made like Post Apart, something about climate change. And later on, I made Let Me Kill My Mother First. It's a short film about child abuse. Yeah, so I don't want to make content that affect people, and like so that people care about that subject. So actually, what disappointed me was that a film that I spent 5 years working on, I feel that less than 1,000 people in the world have seen it. Yeah. And I looked at a YouTube video, like, and upload overnight, they get 1 million views. So that really triggered something in me. I was like, okay, how do I get in that space? Like, how do I make something that influence people, like that people care about? Because like all these eyeballs that they have generated from the young generation is something that I'm kind of envious of. Like, so I told myself, okay, I need to understand how this works. I may never be a YouTuber or like a TikToker, but I want to understand this market. Yeah, that's when it caught my interest and I studied it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're basically suggesting that the next, Wong Kar-wai, the next Quentin Tarantino will have started by shooting on the iPhone or on a mobile phone and would have started on TikTok, and
Yeah.
started a craft there instead of, having to work their way up on the
Mm.
production house.
Actually, I think it would be probably it could be two different groups of people, because filmmaking is like a craft on its own. Like to achieve something of that level still requires years of like craft and knowledge. So people who want to go down that path, they can still do that path. But I think there is another group of people who are creating different types of content, and we should not discount them. Yeah.
Yeah, you're also saying there's a stylistic or genre difference as well. So
Yes, yes.
the Wong Kar-wai of TikTok is different from the Wong Kar-wai of film, but of course they probably would have started using their phones actually instead of you using your camera slash camcorder
Yeah,
back in the day, right?
that's true.
Uh, Interesting. And so, could you share with us, a time that you have been brave?
I would think it would be the time I went to UK to study without a scholarship. Because I applied for the scholarship, I didn't receive it, and so I was in this like 7 days hellhole. Like on one hand, okay, I'm happy I got into the film school where only 8 students get accepted each year. But on the other hand, I'm like, okay, where am I going to come out with 80,000 all of a sudden? So that few days was really, really stressful. But I was like, okay, like let's just go for it. Like I can borrow money from somewhere, and luckily I had some savings from the 2 years of working. Yeah, so I'm really glad that I made the plunge. I think sometimes my friends would tell me, hey son, you don't invest, you are not a big gambler, but like something that you did is like it's quite scary that you gambled 50,000 of your of your savings on this, and you don't even know what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm glad that I made that choice.
I'm also glad that you made that choice as well. Um, that's actually a common problem, right, for so many folks, right? Because I think in Singapore, it's one of the rare countries where actually people get scholarships from the government to go to a good university. So that's actually a privilege, I think, in Southeast Asia, right? Because lots of people in other Southeast Asian countries don't get to. They may not necessarily have the knowledge to be able to apply, let's just say. But even if they do, they definitely don't have government access. But let's just say, I think as a common story in Singapore, and I think across in other countries, like in Indonesia or Vietnam, where they can go to good universities, like yourself, but they can't, it's just non-conventional, right? Or they can't, there's no government scholarship, etc. how would you recommend them to weigh the problem of whether to go
Mm.
versus stay at a local school? That's one. And secondarily, I guess, if they were to go, how would you recommend them to think about putting together the capital, I guess,
Mm.
um, to get there? Yeah.
Mm. A great question. So I think I was quite lucky. Like the first year I didn't get the scholarship. So every day I just ate like porridge. But the second year I managed to receive the IMDA scholarship. So that really helped my life there. And I think back on that experience, I was like, okay, if I hadn't received the second year of scholarship, what would I have done? So I think I would probably took up. I would continue my part-time job because back then I worked at the bars during the weekends and also in the evenings to get some savings. Yeah, so I would probably continue to have done that. And the school was actually very helpful. Like they're saying, okay, if you can't afford it right now, like you can slowly pay us back. So they were very helpful to some international students. Yeah, so I think but often the like that fear really drives people away from taking a plunge. My advice is that you probably need to have like a few plans, like plan A, B, C, D, E in your mind. I wouldn't want anyone to get into a bad financial debt or anything. Like I think it's about weighing, okay, what is the worst case scenario that can happen to you? Even in the startup life right now, I feel that uh, like we often like compare ourselves to our friends and we feel bad about it because our friends are making enough money to buy a condo or like a car, and there's no way we could have done that. So but I think it's really about, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, currently my parents are, I'm lucky that they are well, like and I'm okay, like I have enough, like I make enough to at least feed myself. I don't have to depend on them to give me money. I think those are the things that I would think about. And if you can accept this, you can take this plunge. Yeah. So I think firstly, don't get into debt. Secondly, weigh the options around you and see, okay, what's the worst scenario that you can get into and whether you can accept that.
I know this sounds crazy because you kind of said that you're happy with how your life has turned out since
Mm,
you taking on that decision to go to the school.
mm,
Yet I wonder, and I'm sure you've thought about this. How do you think your life would have turned out if you chose not to go? Right? Like,
uh,
what would that lens be? Right? Do you think
mm,
you would be where you are today, or I'm so curious.
yeah.
Have you watched that movie or played that movie in your head? Would you be still be the same low earn where just you're hungry, you're driven, you're hardworking? I mean, I'm just kind of curious, right?
Yeah.
Because to you, it's a pivotal moment that you chose. This is the moment you chose as your brave moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious how you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, like all the time, to be honest. I was thinking, okay, if I had kept the job back then, I didn't go to film school, I didn't take the entrepreneur path, what would I have right now? I probably have enough savings, like to buy a house and all that. I would have been in a corporate role and probably a high level manager or directorial level. But I was thinking that I can't like put my mind in all those spaces because like what I have now is actually like the freedom to do what I actually love to do, and also like the living in no regrets. Yeah, so at least when I'm 40, I was like, okay, I took that plunge when I was 25 and when I was 30. Yeah, I think that part is actually quite priceless. Like I think these decisions can be quite priceless. Yeah, I don't know it yet, like, but I think I would appreciate myself taking this plunge when I'm 40 or 50. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Sun. I'd love to wrap things up by paraphrasing the three big themes that I got from this conversation. The first, of course, is thank you so much for I think sharing your journey about your creative start, about how you recorded the moments around you as a child, to how that eventually led to your decisions that let you go to school, to film, to be a producer, to eventually winning BAFTA, and how that felt to be hanging out with all the celebrities. So I love that journey. I think an inspirational one for that representation and for that sharing that insight, right, about what that journey looks like from a skills and chronological perspective. I think the second, of course, is actually that very interesting discussion about representation from two angles. The first being East versus West. From the idols being and role models being Wong Kar-wai versus Quentin Tarantino, to looking at scripts representing, for example, Singapore versus America, to you studying in the UK, to working here across Southeast Asia, and what it was like to be on the stage, right? Speaking with the other lady and being one of the few non-white, non-male folks on stage, which is an interesting thing to realize, right? And also, I think being frank about what it means to be an insider in Singapore growing up, but to be an outsider as a student, but to again have that reverse culture shock coming back again in Singapore. That's interesting as well. And I think the second angle, of course, is the angle about what it means to find that Southeast Asia voice, right? So I think that angle of representation is really interesting. And lastly, thank you so much for sharing about, the uncertainty of being a founder, right? Which is about how the 50 things you learned as a producer, the various responsibilities, has helped prepare you to be a founder in many ways. Yet, it's also been interesting to learn about the uncertainty because you've had to be a lot more focused, and you can't diversify to the same extent. And I think there's also a lot of learnings you've had around how it's also matured your understanding of the creative industry and how you see creators as not but also a starting and technological difference for the industry as well. So lots of different learnings that's there for everybody and especially for myself. So thank you so much for sharing, Sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me and the great questions.